I think rewilding needs to be looked at as a kind of ally of farming. Think of all the extreme weather events that are hitting us all the time and going to be increasing as climate change takes hold. Rewilding can provide the physical buffers to protect agricultural land.
Hello and welcome to the Lodgecast, a nature and wildlife podcast brought to you by the Beaver Trust. I'm Sophie Pavelle.
And I'm Eva Bishop. Each episode we bring you the latest news from the Beaver Trust as we welcome beavers back to our rivers to restore our countryside and create resilient landscapes.
And we also explore the state of nature in the UK and speak to fascinating experts and inspiring individuals along the way.
Today we're talking about taking risks for nature and are joined by Isabella Tree from the pioneering conservation project at the Knepp Estate in Sussex and author of the wonderful book Wilding.
Good morning, Eva. Greetings. Welcome to another episode of Season 3 of the Lodgecast.
Good morning, Sophie. Good morning, good afternoon or good evening to those of you listening from around the world. How are you all doing?
A collective. We're really good.
How are you doing, actually?
I'm really good. Yeah, I'm good. I have to say I'm so excited for this episode. I can't wait to talk to Izzy. She's just a legend and a lovely person and just totally humble about the incredible things that she and her family and the team at Knepp have done over the years, and just really kind of setting a new bar for the new norm in how we should be treating the land and talking about nature. So yeah, I'm very excited.
Completely. The state of nature is so poor that we really have to push the envelope now, take big risks and do new things. And as you say, Izzy's an amazing person. I actually felt like I got to know her a bit more on the Desert Island Discs that she did. That was excellent.
Nice.
Highly recommend it. Down to earth, meet the person type of, with some great tune choices as well, may I say. But big ambitious projects like Knepp Estate are really becoming strongholds for British wildlife, which we really, really need now. New environmental leadership. And projects like these are so important for giving threatened species a habitat, but also for creating a place where more research can be done and we can get a better understanding of what our native species need and how best to help them.
Definitely. And I first came across Izzy when several people just suddenly started recommending her incredible book, Wilding. And it's just one of the few nature books that I read incredibly quickly because I just couldn't put it down. By trade, Izzy is a journalist and she's written many travel books, and so she's an amazing writer anyway. But then to tell this incredible, unique and just a really hopeful story about the Knepp Estate was just made for an incredible read, and to be able to be sort of walked through as a reader step by step the trials and tribulations and just the barriers involved into revolutionising how they use their land. I just can't recommend it enough.
One of the things that fascinated me or interested me about the Wilding book was how many non-nature and wildlife folk were reading it. It was on everyone's bedstands, you know. Yeah. And it really broke through that because it's such a fascinating and new thing to do.
Yeah. Totally. Now, Eva, last time I checked, you don't own a huge castle estate unless something drastic has changed since we last spoke. But you are a lady who loves working with the land, gardening for wildlife, growing your own food, having your famous chickens. So do you have, what are your thoughts on, size of things, and how does, say, the success and story of Knepp translate into the person with a garden or a little patch of land?
Well, this is a huge topic itself and definitely one for series 4 of the Lodgecast, the whole scale of wilding and gardening for nature. It would be great to get someone on to talk about that. But it's something that's really important to me. And when you start to look at, like any climate action, when you start to scale up and multiply by the number of small gardeners in Britain, your action really matters. And so with a couple of friends around here, we do some really nice organic gardening and take it quite seriously and just absolutely love it. So I do dream of a Knepp, but my little nearly 2 acres is great. And we've done things like no mow in the orchard and the lawn, and the change is dramatic. Even in one season, you stop mowing things. But one of the great things that can easily translate is the perceived mess, inverted commas. So, farming is a very straight, margined, system. And when you look at Knepp, it's just messy and wild. And that's hard for some people to get their heads around because it's a big change. And it's the same with a small garden. So
yeah. You've spoken to me before about giving nettles space to invade.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Well, they're an important habitat. Ladybirds, for example, will lay their eggs on nettles, and they are in turn a useful predator for some of the crop raiders in an organic garden. So, I try and do that. But you can also use nettles for manure, and so make nettle tea. Great source of nutrients.
A firm favourite in the Pavelle household.
Well, for your veg patch. So yeah, there's lots of things that you can do, and it's on a much smaller scale. It's still a privilege to have a big garden. So nettles in a really small garden might not feel like the right choice, but they can be really important. And yeah, again, when you multiply it up, it's valuable for nature. I'm not sure anything we're doing in our garden is massively breaking the mold, but
I think it's just setting that same standard. And I think just the hardest thing is to change how humans see things. We get so stuck in our ways and we choose to put labels on things, and we get very anxious and uncomfortable if things suddenly change. And so what I think this conversation with Izzy is going to be so vital for is just showing us the power of just shifting those baselines, changing the way we see things, and with a much more hopeful, wild, biodiverse world because of it.
And something that everyone can do is ask why. Why do we do that? Why do we cut that? Why do we spray that? And what if we didn't? What if we let that? Because that's what Izzy and Charlie did. They said, what if we do this? And they had a go at it. And it's really, that's amazing thought and action leadership. So I can't wait to talk to her. So I actually went there. I don't know if you've been, Soph.
I have, yes. Fleeting. So I went there to stay in one of their tree houses, and then there was a thunderstorm that night, and I was so terrified. It was coming closer and closer, and I was like, trees, thunderstorms, aren't you meant to get away from them, not sleep in them when there's lightning? So that was very amusing, but yeah, we survived. So that's all good. Quite exciting. Very exciting. Made for an extra dramatic visit. That's very cool. Incredible place to visit. No, it really is. I think what struck me when I went to Knepp was just the noise, just the kind of soundscape of Knepp. And it is under the Gatwick flight path. It's very connected. You can see the light pollution of London at night in the distance. So you're not, it's not like you're in the Cairngorms or in the middle of nowhere. You're in an accessible, busy part of the southeast of England. And yet animals and nature have found a place there, and just the noise is astonishing. And I went in the autumn, and so I can only imagine what spring must be like. Yeah, completely. Well, I think it is time we speak to Izzy herself. So dialing in from one of the most talked about estates in the UK, in conservation and wildlife circles at least, and no doubt in a room not too far from nesting storks or with a view of some mighty longhorn cattle, here is author Isabella Tree. So Izzy, welcome to the Lodgecast. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Absolute pleasure. Lovely to be here.
Oh, it's really lovely to have you. So first of all, we need you to do something very important, as we need you to judge this episode's beaver fact off. And as it turns out, there is almost a never-ending supply of interesting beaver facts. So each episode, Eva and I come armed with our favourite beaver fact. Some are more tenuous than others. And then it's your job as our guest to decide which fact you think is better or more interesting. So I'll kick off. Now, this is almost opinion than fact, but we'll see what you think. Many people say that beavers cannot climb due to being very bottom heavy as mammals. They have poor eyesight, they have webbed feet, so you'd think they'd be quite slippery on a slope. But there are a number of videos emerging online and rumours spreading showing beavers scaling near vertical banks, climbing trees. I've seen them climb some quite large willow trees, and so I'm personally claiming that they in fact can climb very well and that in fact beaver climbing skills are a vital part of beaver ecology. A claim, but more than a fact. Okay, and my fact is that beaver fur is incredibly dense, so it has around 10,000 hairs per square centimetre,
which is quite amazing compared to humans typically only have 100 to 200 hairs per square centimetre, or maybe 50 in my case, on its way out. But 10,000 hairs per square centimetre, really dense.
I have to say I go for that one. I absolutely love it. We know beavers can climb. I mean, you know, having had a bit of experience with them here at Knepp for a very brief moment, they are the ultimate escapologists.
Fair enough.
We love them for it. But I think they're hugely adventurous and I'm sure they're incredibly versatile and can cope with all sorts of obstacles and climb trees and stuff. And I knew that their fur was very thick, and obviously why it was so prized back in the day for beaver pelts. But knowing how many hairs per centimetre, I think is just fantastic. And I would love to know how that compares with, for example, a polar bear or something like that.
Do you know, that was the next step. I should have done that. We need to do more research.
We shall follow up.
Snow leopard or something, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that'd be good, wouldn't it? Well done, Eva.
Thank you.
Good one.
Delighted.
Right, Izzy, for listeners who haven't, I don't know how they wouldn't have, but for those who haven't heard about Knepp Estate or those who haven't read your fantastic book, Wilding, could you perhaps give us the highlights and maybe, if you can, in a nutshell, what are you and your husband, Charlie Burrell, doing with the land you have, and why did you shift from farming to nature regeneration?
Well, we inherited this lovely piece of land from Charlie's grandparents in the 1980s. It's 3,500 acres of, well, it's very heavy Sussex clay. So it's been a bit of a double-edged sword. But when we inherited it, it was under intensive arable and dairy farm management. And the business was failing. It was losing money hand over fist, even with farming subsidies. For 17 years, Charlie, who was trained at agricultural college, did everything he possibly could to turn its fortunes around. You know, he invested in better machinery, in infrastructure. We experimented with Charlie Burrell's Castle Dairy ice cream. We did all sorts of things. And of course, inevitably, more fertiliser, more chemical inputs on the land. And it took about 17 years to realise that what we were always battling with was our really heavy Sussex clay. We sit on 320 metres of this stuff. So in winter, it's like porridge. In summer, it bakes as hard as concrete. And it means effectively that for farming, if you have a really wet winter, as most of our winters are, you cannot sometimes get heavy machinery onto this land for 6 months of the year. So you can't do any of your maintenance, any of your track maintenance, your ditches, your hedge cutting. You can't even sometimes sow spring crops. So you just cannot be competitive with farms on lovely loamy soil. We're always going to need land for agricultural production, but it really needs to be places where it's profitable and free draining, lovely, naturally rich soils, not on marginal land like us. So we decided, Charlie really, my husband, made this momentous decision to give up farming in 1999. And luckily, it was very timely. We managed to sell our milk quota at the high point before it crashed the very next year. It was also the year of just before the foot and mouth outbreak. So we managed to escape that. So we managed to clear our debts by selling our farm machinery and our beautiful 3 dairy herds. And we really wanted to do something that was going to work with the land rather than battling against it all the time. And we were inspired by the work of Frans Vera, the Dutch ecologist, who had just published his work, Grazing Ecology and Forest History, in English that very same year. And it was kind of sending ripples of sort of shock waves, I think, through the conservation and ecological community at the time. Because France was, what his work really identifies is that free roaming large herbivores, everything from bison to tarpan to aurochs to red deer to reindeer to wild boar to beavers, are keystone species, and that they shape the landscape, they create habitats. And if you want to recover biodiversity, then you need to put these animals back in the landscape and allow them to do their disturbance to create habitat for you. Obviously, some of those species are now extinct. So what you can do is use proxies of, for example, instead of the aurochs, the primeval ox that went extinct, we have its domesticated descendants. So we're using an old breed of cow, the longhorn cow, and we're using Exmoor ponies in place of the tarpan, the original horse, and we're using Tamworth pigs to imitate the disturbance of wild boar. And so once you put these animals back into a landscape, you're kind of kick-starting natural processes, and you're allowing them to put nature back in the driving seat. They are the drivers, the impetus that kind of pulls the glider back into the sky again so it can fly. And then as human beings, you just sit back and wait to see what happens.
I imagine that you say when you decided to give up farming in, 1999, that can't have been an easy decision. I mean, how important are taking massive risks for not only, I guess, business, but also conservation and biodiversity and nature?
Well, it was certainly no risk from an economic point of view. We were, true. The farming business was almost bankrupt. I mean, and it was bankrupt. I mean, we rarely made a profit. I think there were 2 years in those 17 that we actually made a profit. But also we were endlessly having to spend money on capital outlay the whole time. So there was just no future in it. So giving up was just pure relief, actually, once we'd made that decision. I think it was more really of an emotional challenge. I think, you have generations of a family. Charlie's family have been here for over 200 years. Farming is in their DNA. I remember his aunt, Penelope, telling me that, as children, they were sort of told that they would only go to heaven if they could make 2 blades of grass grow where one had grown before. That's how much they kind of were vested in farming this landscape. So when you give up that sort of scale of farming, it's really going against the grain, literally, of your own family's DNA and the farmers around us who still couldn't understand why we were doing this. But really, I think Charlie was very clever. I mean, I think he saw on the horizon that farm subsidies sooner or later would go. There was a lot of talk in Europe about the unsustainability of farming subsidies. I think when we were farming, that 56% of the entire EU budget went on farming subsidies. I think now it's more like 34% or something, but it's still massive and it's unsustainable, and it's driving a system that we know is environmentally destructive. So sooner or later, something was going to give. And without subsidies, we were totally shot. So the shocking thing to us now is that we realise that if farming had been profitable on our land, we probably would still be doing it. And we know now how destructive we were being. And we've been now on this long journey, and we now recognise what we can bring back to the land when you allow it to rest and recuperate and regenerate on its own. And we look back in horror with what we were doing when we, even in those days, we considered ourselves to be nature lovers. We didn't think we were doing anything wrong.
Yeah. You say you were going against the grain, and there's so many questions that arise for me here, but going against the grain with your family, but also against farming generally and the perceived, next steps. And I wonder how far, I know that you give talks far and wide, and there's loads of interest in rewilding, which is so great. How far are other people joining in? Are you seeing much of a shift? And is that locally because your experience has been on the heavy clay soils in Sussex, and are you seeing people around you shift? Or do you think that there's going to be, that needs to happen? Yeah, how do we make more people do this, and what's your experience been in terms of what people are doing?
I think it is happening, and I think it's really, really exciting. I don't know if you heard, George Eustace's, statement the other day, saying that there's going to be money to be paid to farmers for rewilding or creating more space for nature. This is exactly what we need. The government now is giving very clear directives to farmers to start farming responsibly in a regenerative way. We are changing the way we're looking at land management, which is absolutely amazing. We're now, going to be rewarding farmers for restoring soils, for cutting the amount of inputs and chemicals, for looking after their watercourses and all of that. That's the carrot. And we're also hopefully going to be threatening with a stick. If you do actually pollute, you're going to be held responsible. So the direction of travel is absolutely going in the right way. And I think rewilding needs to be looked at as a kind of ally of farming. A year or so ago, farmers still are talking sometimes in these terms that, rewilding is seen as a threat, or it's competing for land that might be used for farming. But increasingly, I think the story is becoming more nuanced, and that people are beginning to understand that we're not going to be rewilding everywhere. We're always going to need productive land for intensive food production. But rewilding can really provide the life support system that farming needs to survive and actually even to be sustainable and increase its yield. So if you have rewilding threading through your agricultural landscapes, your landscapes everywhere, it can provide the services like water storage. It can replenish your water tables. It can prevent floods. It can protect farmland from flooding. It can protect farmland from drought. It can provide the pollinating insects. And we're not just talking honeybees. We're talking night-flying moths and hoverflies and all the myriad brilliant pollinators that are out there. And the natural pest control. So, reducing the need for pesticides, because if you have a healthy ecosystem, you've got fantastic pest control out there. Think of all the extreme weather events that are hitting us all the time and going to be increasing as climate change takes hold. Rewilding can provide the physical buffers to protect agricultural land.
Have you already seen that at Knepp? I was going to ask you that. Or have you suffered from droughts and floods similarly because they're so extreme already?
We had that in the first year of lockdown, I think, when we're all so aware of the climate and every day, we're kind of, we're much more aware of it. We had that really hot summer and a very, very dry spring. And in the old days when we were farming, that kind of weather would be guaranteed to crack up our land. You would literally be able to put your fist into the cracks up to your shoulder. Wow. And it would look like an African drought. All the farmland around us looked like that. And our hearts went out to farmers because we knew what that felt like. But on the land at Knepp, we couldn't find any cracks. It was the soil is now holding on to so much moisture that it was actually being much, much more resilient. We know that in times of big rains, we've been having quite a few recently, buildings and roads downstream from us that always used to flood just don't flood anymore. And we know that water that comes onto Knepp, that we test, the water comes on from farmland and from roads around us, is always polluted with nitrates and just general pollutants. But once it's been through our now functioning soils and the filtration system of our vegetation, the standing water on Knepp everywhere is of the highest possible quality. So we're also cleaning the water. We're sort of already beginning to do the work of beavers in that respect. But, they could still be the icing on the cake.
Absolutely. Yeah. Izzy, have there been, you document these sorts of things so brilliantly in your book, but were there any surprises along the way where things happened and in your wildest dreams you never thought it'd be possible?
Well, I think we didn't have any real goals or targets. That's the joy, I think, of rewilding, is you're not trying to work with an ambition of achieving these particular species targets. We were just hoping that, broadly speaking, biodiversity would increase. And I think we've been surprised in every sort of respect, from just the abundance of species. The songbirds, we had a BTO survey, I think it was last year or the year before now, that is indicating that we may have the highest density of songbirds in Britain at Knepp.
Wow.
Okay. Literally you can feel it when you go out and hear the dawn chorus in April. It's just mind-blowing surround sound noise. I think the rarity of the species has also absolutely blown us away. So, turtle doves probably being the most poignant, because the RSPB reckons that they are the most likely bird to go extinct in the next generation. And when I was growing up in the 1960s, we had 250,000 turtle doves in Britain. They were the backdrop to my summers. I used to hear that lovely tour tour, and it was synonymous with long, lazy, school holidays. And now we're down to probably fewer than 3,000. I think there was a county-wide survey in Sussex last year or the year before that identified 80 territories of turtle doves, and a quarter of those are on Knepp. So,
oh, wow. Gosh.
I think it's probably too late to save the turtle dove for Britain, because it's probably now dropped way below its critical mass. But it does show that, the potential is there. And if we can start mending our landscapes, healing our land, and providing lovely, thorny, scrubby habitat, we might be able to save species like the nightingale.
In relation to that, the obvious question is, does size matter? And how do you often encourage people, no matter what, to do this?
Absolutely. I mean, I think Charlie and I are now working on the Book of Rewilding, which we hope is going to be a kind of practical guide, or a sort of, a book of ideas about rewilding. So from big and small. So from net size to farm clusters to small holdings to cities to river catchments to your own back garden, an orchard, a graveyard, your roadside verges. What can you do? And I think some of the principles of rewilding can very easily be applied to small scale. I mean, for a start, going chemical free is an obvious solution. Yes. I mean, that is a game changer instantly. But I think thinking in terms of connectivity. So, even if you've got a window box outside your flat in a city, if you can plant up native species or wildflowers or plants that are good for pollinating insects, or even with seed and berry resources for birds, it's worth thinking about, how does that connect? How can you work as a stepping stone around you? So if there's nothing around you at all, you're going to have very little influence, just your window box. But if you can persuade your neighbours to have window boxes, or someone to have plant pots on their steps outside their front door, if you can persuade your council to let the verges be allowed to, to grow and sustain wildflowers, then suddenly you're part of an integrated system where you will then start to see insects and birds come to your window box. So it's about kind of that spark that ignites a chain reaction that can happen in your neighbourhood.
That's so exciting. I mean, how far can the project at Knepp go? What are you thinking is next? I feel like it's just so exciting every turn you take.
Other than beavers.
Well, again, we're thinking very much...
Other than beavers.
Yeah, well, of course. That's next on the agenda. But we are, in that theme of connectivity, Knepp on its own is a bubble. It's an island. And, certain birds can move. Not all of them. Some are very territorial and they need complex habitats. But basically, we're a biodiversity hotspot that is longing to spill out into the wider landscape. Unless there's habitat for them out there, they're not going anywhere. And we desperately need connectivity in order for our species to be able to move in response to climate change, as well as, of course, to pollution and extreme weather events and everything else. And of course, they have to meet up with other populations of their own species if they're going to be able to sustain genetic diversity. So connection is everything. And so now we're working on this wonderful project called the Wheel to Waves project with a farmer who has the last piece of land between Bognor and Brighton that's undeveloped pretty much.
Oh, wow.
Called the Climping Gap. He's a wonderful farmer, James Baird. In fact, he's coming over this evening for supper. We're going to be thrashing out the Wheel to Waves project again.
I'd love to be a fly on the wall in that conversation.
So we want to connect Knepp ultimately with the sea via the Climping Gap, but also north towards the Ashdown Forest. Have this fantastic regenerated nature corridor with biodiversity hotspots along it, like kind of like the pearls on a necklace, joining Ashdown via Knepp to the sea. And eventually we hope to see seals popping on the beach at Climping, space for wading birds again, but also that connection between the Help the Kelp marine conservation project off the Sussex coast, which is so exciting, connecting with terrestrial nature restoration. And that's going to be really, really exciting. That's our future. But also, of course, beavers, and of course, one day bison, maybe elk, you name it.
Wow.
Our ambitions kind of grow by the year.
Good, as they should, given that experience. Ours are similarly growing, actually. We're looking at river buffers and that connectivity story and what can be done to... and we've formed a NGO partnership called Riverscapes with National Trust, Woodland Trust and Rivers Trust. And obviously there's a big policy stick or carrot, whichever way you look at it, required. But do you think there's enough mass understanding as well of the benefits of these nature corridors and the benefits of strong biodiversity for farming outcomes to help that along? Or do you think actually there's a huge education still required?
I think there's a huge education still required. I think people are beginning to get it. I think the wider public are beginning to get it. Farmers are beginning to get it. But we need to keep hammering home this idea that it's not just about fluffy wildlife. And I love what the Beaver Trust is doing because, you know, I love how you've taken it to landscape scale transformation. And of course, river catchments, massively important. When we look at the way our river systems are, I mean, in such a terrible state. I mean, we are still the sick man of Europe in that respect. And how we have to think in terms of landscape scale, you know, from the water falling on the hilltops to the moment it reaches the sea and everything in between. And of course, the beaver with its movement is absolutely key for that. But I think, as you say, I think that we need to keep hammering home the fact that it's not just about the pleasure and the joy of having wildlife back in our landscapes. Of course, that's true. It's about the systems that underpin our own survival. We are at crisis point, and we have to keep mentioning the elephant in the room. You know, this is it. This is the generation, the decade where we could turn things around. It's completely within our ability, but we have to make sure it gets done.
So beavers give us a lot of hope, and I think the Knepp gives a lot of the British public hope. What gives you hope that we can do more to turn this around, Izzy?
Well, I think just the response to rewilding, the response to having beavers back in our landscape. You know, we did attempt to introduce beavers to Knepp. It was the year before last now. I keep forgetting we're in 22. But we did have an attempt. We were one of the few licenses where we didn't have to actually put them into an enclosure. We could just release them into the southern block of the estate. And we thought that they'd be there for 10 years because there's so much wetland and lovely sallow for them to be playing around with. And within about 2 weeks, they were gone. And they had gone adventuring. But what was so encouraging, I think, was the public response to seeing beavers out there in the landscape. One of our beavers crossed 20 weirs and ended up near Shoreham. Actually ended up on a piece of organic farmland, so it had, you know, great judgment,
good taste,
but good taste. But on the way, it was spotted, you know, on riverside walks, and people were sending in video clips. They were so excited, and the other beaver went in the opposite direction and ended up on a farm on an angling pond. And Billy, they called her, the anglers, the angling club. And we brought Billy back, reinstalled her, worked out on the webcams where she got out, reinforced the fencing. And the next week she was back there on that angling pond. And they loved her. They really, you know, they said, "Are you sure there's no way we can keep her?" And unfortunately, you know, our license, you know, we had to have her returned to Knepp. So I think that excitement and that understanding that we could have a wilder, more beautiful, more exciting landscape to live in. And I think people understanding that we are missing so much has really taken hold. And I think that's the most
That's
hopeful.
a really good point.
Thank you. Yeah.
Izzy, of course, we can't talk to you and not mention that you have another book coming out soon-ish or on the way. Do we know
that's
when
that's the book of rewilding.
Okay.
So that is due out on the spring 23.
Okay.
And yes, so I hope that will be kind of inspiring and helpful for people who are interested in rewilding, but also, transforming their own plot or how they can get involved. It will have a lot of resource material, places to connect with, people to help with getting a wilder world for us all. And I've got a children's book coming out, I think later this year, which is when the Stalks Came Home. So that's about our White Stalk reintroduction project.
Oh, well, we'll definitely have to do some shouting about that. And just as a quick sort of side question, what's your writing process look like? Because obviously nature is a huge inspiration for you and you have such a unique connection and a journey with nature. Do you find catharsis in writing about it and kind of reflecting on your relationship with it?
Yes, I do. I mean, you can see the state of my office. It's rewilded itself.
Yes, it's dreamy.
But I do. I love writing, and I've done it since my early 20s, and Wilding was my 5th book, I think. So I sort of, I think probably every writer has a love-hate relationship with it because you spend a lot of time on your own. It is quite grueling. It takes a long time to get that feedback ultimately from your publisher or whoever's going to read it first. But there's also something, you get very deep into it. And for me, writing about the project here, Rewilding at Knepp, was so interesting because, over a period of 20 years, you forget those moments of epiphany or the moments of jeopardy or when you were really up against it and thinking, oh my God, is this going to work? Have we done the right thing? Or, battling with trying to get the message across that it was working and that we should be celebrating. So it was a very interesting process, kind of reliving particularly the early days of the project.
Yeah.
Well, we'll look forward to those books, particularly the children's one myself.
I'm also doing wilding for young people. So I think it's for sort of 12 to 13 age bracket. So it's a sort of digest of the main themes of wilding for
difficult age group to reach as well. So that's really great that you're targeting them.
I think that's all we've got time for today, actually.
Alas.
Alas. Although we'll be watching the beaver evolution in the next few months. This might be out by the time the beavers are there. So we'll see.
I hope so. I daren't jinx it, but we're crossing our fingers. And I think our approach this time, we're going to put them in a temporary enclosure. And we hope this time we have a bonded pair. I think that was one of the problems with the last pair. And we will put them in a temporary enclosure and wait for them to build their lodge and a dam and start doing their wonderful hydrological engineering. And that we hope will heft them to the spot. So we also last time released them in November, which I think is the time, you can correct me, when they're actually beginning to look for partners for breeding. And so I think they were being particularly adventurous in search of other love interests. They obviously weren't interested in each other. So hopefully releasing them in the spring and giving them a time to get used to Knepp will, we hope, encourage them to commit to us.
We have everything crossed for you.
Tales from the new Love Island to follow.
Exactly.
Dear, brilliant. Well, we can't wait to see what happens. And I'm sure everyone will follow it with interest. Thank you so much for joining us today. Fascinating.
Thanks, Izzy.
It's so exciting in the directions it could go. So let's hope everything continues well.
No, pleasure. Well, thanks so much for having me and absolutely love what you do.
Oh, wow. How good was that?
Absolutely amazing. Izzy Tree talking live about Knepp.
I know.
I envy her so much. What an amazing life to lead, to have all that responsibility and all that success in conservation and nature restoration, and it's just dreamy. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think I'm so impressed by her attitude towards it, because I feel like your average person would just feel they've just overcome so many unbelievably enormous challenges, and yet they haven't felt defeated, or if they have felt defeated, they've risen up and then just made something incredible. And I think if they can do it, anyone can do it. And I feel like if they can kind of have an industrial farming background that's 200 years old from the family, and yet they still can change their mindset and respond to the times, I think it's
and
very
lead
hopeful.
the way. Such leadership.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Awesome.
Right, the end of this episode is in sight, which can only mean one thing. It's time to be quizzed.
Yes, buckle up, Eva. This one is,
And Emma.
And Emma,
Out
of
your
course.
box.
Emma, out your box.
Come on
I'm
down.
just getting limbering up to be
Buckle up,
released.
strap in, ladies, because we've got a fascinating quiz about the water cycle coming up.
Oh, yes.
Oh no, I'm going to be so bad at this already. I know this.
No, but it's
is
not
gonna be Eva's
really.
wheelhouse.
I think the title's misleading because it's.
This is
just about
Sophie's
water.
quiz, Emma. Don't worry. It's not gonna
Yeah, it's. It
probably
doesn't
gonna be
follow a
about
logical path. Yeah,
Is it more or less logical than the what three words quiz?
the infamous terrible quiz of Gillian. That was. I think there must have been something in the air that day. We were all completely off our rocker.
That was a very giggly
episode.
episode. It was fun.
It
Fun
was
to pull
episode
together.
1 of season 2. If you would like to listen back to Gillian on fire and us just bonkers. Anyway, quiz, water cycle. Question 1. How much fresh water on planet Earth can we actually see? Is it A, 5%? C, B goes before C, doesn't it? B, 0.5%, or C, 0.3%. How much fresh water on planet Earth can we actually see? 5%, 0.5, or 0.3?
Well, none of them are very much. That's quite cool. Cool fact.
Thanks. Eva, what do you think?
I think I'm going to go 5%.
How are we defining C?
C, I'd say from a aerial
if we're looking,
kind of
okay.
perspective.
I'll go 0.5 then, because I'm guessing so much is stored in like really deep lakes and thick glaciers and things, right?
What did you say, Eva?
Such a good point. Yeah, I said 5%. I'm regretting it.
Okay,
But I'm going to stick with it.
You're both incorrect. It
No.
is 0.3%. There's actually more fresh water in the atmosphere than in all the
Oh,
rivers
wow.
combined.
Oh my gosh, I hadn't even thought of that. That's a good point.
Clouds. Nice.
Ah.
Cool. Question 2. How much of Earth's water is salty? Is it A, 97%, B, 88%, or C, 92%? 97, 88, or 92? Salty.
Is this including the water in the atmosphere?
Oh yeah.
No. I'm going to go right in the middle, 92. Isn't that indecisive of me?
Yeah, I'm going to fence it as well with 92.
In that case, I'll go 97.
Oh no, okay.
Eva's correct. It is
Damn it.
97.
Pushed you in
Yeah.
the right direction.
Thanks for that.
And question 3 follows on from that answer. And the remaining fresh water, where is the majority of that stored? A, the atmosphere. Gosh, look at my notes. I've gone A, C, D.
Wow.
Oh no.
What? Oh, dear.
Can we trust the reliability of this quiz?
Is it A, the atmosphere, B, rivers, or the atmosphere, rivers, or ice caps and glaciers?
Oh, I'm going ice caps and glaciers.
What was the first what was the question?
The remaining 3% of fresh water.
Yeah.
Where is the majority?
Where's the
of that
majority
stored?
ice caps?
Okay, you're both correct. And that means that all life on Earth only has access to 1% of Earth's water. How mad is that?
bonkers, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is
Wow.
mad.
Good, but very
Well done.
difficult
Great.
quiz
So
there.
Eva won.
I know what my next quiz is going to be. It's the alphabet.
The alphabet. Eva will win that one. And with that, let's call time on this episode of the Lodgecast, I think.
Don't forget that to celebrate this series, we're giving away a few copies of Bringing Back the Beaver, a book by friend of Beaver Trust, Derek Gow, about reintroducing beavers in the UK.
Yes, and for a chance to win, you can post about how much you love the Lodgecast by tagging @BeaverTrust and using hashtag the Lodgecast on Twitter or Instagram, or you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and email us a screen grab of it so that we know it was you on info@beavertrust.org.
Yes, and we'll announce the winners at the end of the series.
Yes, and don't forget this series, we are releasing our episodes weekly. So we'll see you next Tuesday for another superb quiz on the alphabet and a brilliant chat with Arlen Rickard, OBE, founder of the West Country Rivers Trust and later the whole umbrella Rivers Trust organisation, and is now their chief policy advisor after 25 years of leading the movement. That is going to be amazing.
Yes, please make sure you have subscribed to the Lodgecast on your platform of choice so that you don't miss it.
And for more from Beaver Trust, don't forget that you can find us on Instagram and Twitter @BeaverTrust. Head over to our website, beavertrust.org, and sign up to our free newsletter.
See you next week. This podcast, as always, is a mixture of fact and opinion. It was hosted by Sophie Pavelle and Eva Bishop. It was produced and edited by Emma Brisdion for Beaver Trust.